This morning, unlock the power of personal development. Our next guest works to transform lives and teams.
Thais Gibson joins us now. She's an acclaimed author, speaker, and leader in the personal development field. Good morning, Thais.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for coming on.
I'm excited to be here.
Yes.
So tell us about some of the work that you do and who you work with and what it is that's driven you to do this.
So essentially where we focus on something called attachment theory, and we have an online business that does all sorts of different courses and learning sort of modules for individuals who want to learn about their attachment style and what it means to become secure. So every single person has an attachment style, and our attachment style, if you're not already familiar, is actually the subconscious set of rules we have about love in relationships. And so it's based on the way we learn to attach with our parents and caregivers. And then as an adult, we tend to repeat some of these different patterns. So there's 4 major attachment styles. There's a securely attached style. They tend to do the best in romantic relationships and have the most longevity. Then there's an anxious preoccupied style, who usually tends to be very anxious in relationships, sometimes clingy, needy, very afraid of abandonment. And this is because usually in childhood they had a lot of inconsistency. So they had a lot of perceived abandonment growing up. And then we have our dismissive avoidant, who tends to be the commitment fearing person in relationships. They can, want to get close to people, and as soon as there's too much vulnerability, they'll jet out of relationships. And last but not least, the fearful avoidant attachment style, who tends to be very hot and cold in relationships. Usually they grew up in a household where there was a lot of love, but a lot of pain, maybe a bad divorce, a lot of fighting. And so they have conflicting ideas about love, which makes them very hot and cold as adults.
Now, this topic really interests me, and it resonates with me a lot, because when I had learned about attachment styles, I think a lot of how I showed up in relationships, both personally and romantically, really changed. So
Yes.
Talk to us about how understanding what your specific attachment style can really help in a variety of different aspects of our life.
It's a great question and a great point. So essentially what happens is, because we often have this subconscious set of rules, they also frame our expectations. So somebody who's anxious in a relationship, for example, they expect other people to also be clingy. And so when somebody's not, they're like, oh, the person must not care about me at all. And we often give meaning to things that we can't understand based on our own biggest fears. And so what you'll see is the anxious, preoccupied person can really get stuck being extra hurt or more afraid of abandonment. And if you flip-flop it to our dismissive avoidant, the commitment fearing individual, they'll often feel like, well, why is somebody holding on so tight to me? They expect love to be a certain degree of distance that's there. And so you'll see from these different individuals that when we finally learn that, hey, we all have different attachment styles, first of all, it helps us not take things so personally, because we realize, oh, like somebody has different programming than I do. And that's very useful. But also, we're not born with an attachment style. We essentially get our attachment style conditioned through repetition and emotion. It's really how the subconscious mind works. And so when we realize what our attachment style patterns are, if there's certain wounds that we have, like abandonment, or we're afraid of betrayal, or afraid of being trapped, we can actually recondition these fears leveraging principles about our subconscious mind.
How do you go about readdressing or rebalancing someone's outlook or built-in necessities and triggers to realign with how they should be, or how do you adapt?
Yes, so there's sort of 3 major things I like to focus on. So the first one is awareness. So it's learning what our individual patterns are, but then also learning our partners, or even just the different loved ones in our lives. It has a particular impact on our romantic relationships, but it also affects our friendships, our family relationships. So the first big step is to make sure that we are actually understanding our attachment style and the people around us. And that also allows us to have more empathy, right? When we understand somebody, we can empathize with them. When we don't understand their patterns, we give meaning to it. We're like, oh, they don't care about me, they're not being a good person. Whereas we can say, oh no, this is the way that they've learned to adapt from their childhood. So the awareness is the first huge step. The second is that we can actually recondition our core wounds. So we all have these big core wounds. We have the fear of abandonment, the fear of being betrayed, the fear of being trapped or helpless or unsafe in a relationship. And we can leverage key principles of conditioning there's a great tool called auto-suggestion, which leverages repetition and emotion to teach ourselves, hey, I'm not always going to be abandoned, I can have connection. Or I'm not always going to be betrayed, I can learn to trust. And so we have to do a lot of implementing of repetition and emotion, because that's what fires and wires new neural pathways at the subconscious level of mind. And then the third thing is we have to learn our needs and our boundaries, because everybody has different needs, and our needs are sort of their own language, right? If somebody has a need for validation in a relationship and another person has a need for space in a relationship, it's very confusing. But once we learn the language of our needs and we learn how to communicate them, we learn how to share what our true yeses and nos are and what our needs are with one another, that's really the language that unlocks much deeper connection and understanding and allows our differences to actually be things we can still find harmony around.
Absolutely. It's incredible. And, thank you so much for sharing this. I think it's a really great point to sort of understand how we show up in different ways. So there's obviously online courses. Where can people find more information?
Yeah, so our website is www.personaldevelopmentschool.com, and we actually have a free attachment style quiz that comes with a really in-depth report and also some early tools for how to get started.
Great. Thanks, Thais. To learn more, head to the website right there on your screen.